Start video. Let's access to camera.
Karen, this is Michelle. I'm testing to make sure you can hear me okay.
I hear you just fine, Michelle.
Great. We'll give it another minute and then we'll go ahead and start.
That's right, you can speak.
I don't Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, I think we're all set. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Holland with the Virginia Department of Transportation's Mega Projects Department, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's meeting. This is a joint meeting hosted by VDOT and the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, DRPT. Tonight's meeting will cover presentations on DRPT's 495 American Legion Bridge Transit Study and VDOT's 495 Express Lanes Northern Extension Project. You will have opportunities to ask questions following each respective presentation. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live and recorded on our VDOT Live YouTube channel. The recording will be available tomorrow publicly at our 495 project website, 495northernextension.org. All attendees will be muted throughout the duration of tonight's meeting in order to minimize background noise until the appropriate time during the question and answer period. If you're having any technical difficulty, please call 703-691-66715. We have a staff person standing by ready to take your call and help if you're having any technical problems. I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. We have Rob Carey, who is VDOT's Chief Deputy Commissioner, with us this evening. Susan Shaw, VDOT's Director of Mega Projects. Abby Lerner, VDOT's 495 Project Manager. Jennifer Brule, Department of Rail and Public Transportation's Chief of Public Transportation. And Sierra Williams, DRPT's Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager and the Project Manager. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I just want to go over some guidelines so that everybody can participate and get the most out of tonight's meeting. And then I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Rob. We are going to start the evening after Rob Carey gives an introduction. We're going to start with DRPT giving their presentation, and then we will open it up to questions and answers. And then we'll follow that with VDOT's presentation, followed by question and answers. When we get to the question and answer portion of the meetings, we will be using the chat feature primarily for you to ask your questions. You will need to write your question using the chat function. We will then read the questions aloud and answer them in the order received. If you'd rather state the question yourself rather than have us read it, simply write in your name in the chat message and let us know that you have a question. And at the appropriate time, we'll call on and unmute you so that you can ask your question. Each person will be able to only ask one question to begin with, and we'd ask you to please limit it to about 1 minute. If you have more than one question, you will need to ask your remaining questions after everyone has had a turn. We will turn the chat function on and off in intervals so that we can be sure to keep up with the questions and keep this manageable. When the chat function is on, all participants will be able to see all messages. So we ask that you only use the chat to write in your questions. It should not be used for any other commentary during the meeting. Next slide. Okay, if you are joining us tonight by phone and you'd like to ask a question, you'll need to press *3 to raise your hand to indicate that you have a question. You'll be added to the queue. We'll announce when it's your turn to ask your question and we'll unmute the phone line. You will hear your line has been unmuted. At that time, you'll be able to ask your question. Once you've asked your question, please press *3 again to lower your hand, and then you'll be muted again. Those that are joining us by YouTube will not be able to ask questions through that platform this evening. If we need to go back over these instructions, we certainly can do that. Okay, I'd like to now welcome and introduce some elected officials who have joined us this evening at our meeting. Tonight we have with us so far that I can determine, we have Delegate Keene. We have a representative from Supervisor Faust's office, and I believe we have Supervisor Faust with us as well. We have Supervisor Palchuk with us this evening. We have our partners at Fairfax County Department of Transportation, Martha Coelho and Yuqing Xiong with us this evening. We're expecting we also have Senator Favola with us this evening. And we'll keep looking through the participant list. If I've missed anyone, I apologize, but we will find you and be sure to introduce you properly. Supervisor Palchuk has indicated that she would like to say a few words before we get going this evening. So we're going to go ahead and ask her to unmute her line. And then if any other of our elected officials would like to say a few words now, please let us know. You can do that through the chat function. And then we'll go ahead and open that up to you. But at this time, Supervisor Palchuk.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Hope you can all hear me okay. I just wanted to say a quick hello. Thank you to VDOT, to DRPT, and to my colleagues on the board, and Delegate King for being here. I know many of you have been following this project. For some of you, this may be your first time. So I just want you to know that we are here listening to your input, your concerns, and please be sure to share those with the team managers. So that they can be considered in the best possible alternatives for this. The citizen input is vital to the success of this project, really to all projects, and I really hope that we can all collaborate and share how to best make this work for our community. I know I'm very interested in ensuring that we have adequate multimodal support for our community and reduce the impact on the environment and on our county streets. So thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate your work and that of our department, FCDOT, and helping us coordinate this project with the state. So thank you all.
Thank you, Supervisor Palchuk. I'd like to ask Senator Favola. She has indicated she would like to say a few words. If you would go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Okay. I believe I'm unmuted. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you. Well, again, I just want to thank VDOT and Fairfax Board of Supervisors and the Fairfax Transportation team and all the citizens who are taking the time to participate in this process. You know, nothing good comes easily. This is a major project, and we do want to do everything we can to, you know, address the reasonable concerns that come forward. So thank you to everybody who's participating, and most of all, I guess I want the citizens to know that we will work very hard to try to come up with a project that at least garners some support from every sector. It's going to be a challenge, but we're going to work at it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rob Carey, our Chief Deputy Commissioner, and he's going to go ahead and open up our meeting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to everybody that's participating. I particularly want to also thank the elected officials. I know that they have participated in a number of these meetings that everyone on here may not have been on, and I mean, I think it's very worthy to note that they commit a lot of time and effort to this, and that makes the projects better, as was stated earlier. Again, I'm Rob Carey. I'm the Chief Deputy Commissioner of VDOT. Secretary Shannon Ballantyne, the state's Secretary of Transportation, specifically asked me to get engaged in this project and to keep her abreast of what's happening and the various concerns so that we can make sure that we adjust where necessary and deliver the best project we possibly can. Also want to particularly thank Jennifer DeBrule from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. She is the Chief of Transit for the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. So all of the transit activities across the state fall under her. So I think it's certainly important that she and her team are playing a significant role in this meeting tonight, obviously with such a focus on transit in the corridor. Our purpose of tonight's meeting really is twofold. Number one, to ensure that we have knowledge amongst everybody involved in the 495 Next project of the ongoing transit study that Maryland and DRPT are working on. The Maryland Transit Agents Administration and the Department of Maryland Public Transportation been working on this for quite some time. They're doing that in parallel with our 495 Next study. And then the second part of this, obviously, to provide an additional opportunity for input on the 495 Next project, which we have extended the public hearing deadline till December the 4th, so that people will have that opportunity. And doing additional meetings like this is a great example of how we're using that time effectively to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. A little bit of background. I mean, the 495 Next project is really the gap between Tysons and the American Legion Bridge. And the other piece of that is obviously the American Legion Bridge itself. And Governor Northam and Governor Hogan announced jointly the Capital Beltway Accord, which is set to replace the American Legion Bridge. I want everyone to know that VDOT and the Maryland State Highway Administration, as well as the Maryland Department of Transportation Secretary and Secretary Valentine, are actively engaged in discussions on that. That project is actively moving forward with both of our teams collaborating on that to see that through. And I also want to say clearly that Secretary Valentine is 100% committed to multimodalism across the entire state. So I know that's been a concern raised, and I can tell you absolutely that she is committed to multimodalism on the state's transportation network, and particularly in areas like Northern Virginia, where without the transit piece of that equation, transportation just would not work. And so we totally understand that part. So with that, again, if you look on the slide, there's the American Legion Bridge Transit and Transportation Demand Management Study. And then on the other part of the right side of the screen, the I-95 Express Lane Northern Extension Project. Those are the two things that are going on in parallel. And I thought it was appropriate when I put this slide together, put the two puzzle pieces between. And that's really what we're trying to do, is make sure these things marry up, that they work together, they provide the best solution we possibly can for one of the worst bottlenecks in the entire region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer DeBrule, the Chief of Transit with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. She'll say a few words, and then I know her team will lead off with their presentation. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Rob. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. We'll get our slides up on the screen if we could. Great. Thank you, Rob, and thanks to everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. We're really excited to have the opportunity to share with you an update on our I-495 American Legion Bridge Transit and TDM study. Next slide, please. So as Rob just indicated, back in November of 2019, Governor Northam and Governor Hogan announced a bi-state, bipartisan accord to create a new unified capital beltway, replacing the aging American Legion Bridge and relieving congestion at one of the country's worst traffic choke points. Shortly thereafter, in December, we announced jointly with Maryland that we were going to be undertaking a transit study that was focused on that American Legion Bridge and the opportunities that puzzle piece that was missing with the American Legion Bridge provided in terms of transit and transportation demand management. So the transit study has been intended from the beginning to complement the ongoing work with the I-495 Next project and the work that's being done on the Maryland side with the managed lane study. I think it's really important for us to emphasize that this is a joint effort, and we are equal partners in this study with our friends over at the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration. We are jointly managing the study, and we are jointly funding the study. So we have been in it together for almost a year now, and have been working together to develop and prioritize some transit options and travel demand management techniques that would address bi-state travel across the American Legion Bridge. Next slide. So in terms of objectives, the goal of the study is to identify a range of potential current and future multimodal solutions that would reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and enhance connectivity and accessibility across the American Legion Bridge. The study does consider trips between market pairs in Virginia and Maryland that would use the American Legion Bridge, and also considers other improvements that are being considered on the network in that area. Next slide. We have been largely working on a lot of technical analysis, and to do that, our study team, joint study team with DRPT and MDOT, have worked with a very diverse group of stakeholders from local governments and regional bodies, transit agencies, and the business community, representatives like Tysons Partnership, to work through a lot of technical analysis over the past several months. That stakeholder team has helped us as we've looked at a lot of data and have worked through the technical aspects of the study. Next slide. But that's not the only input that we have received as we've worked on the study. We've had the benefit, kind of working a little bit behind the scenes, we've had the benefit of the public comments that has come from the ongoing I-495 Next project here in Virginia, and also the public comment on the Maryland side from the Maryland projects as well. We have, as I mentioned already, had those stakeholder coordination meetings. We've also conducted 2 public surveys. One was conducted back in August. The other is open right now to gain input from commuters and folks that use the American Legion Bridge and the I-495 corridor to get where they need to go, to get input on what alternatives should be considered as the study moves forward. As part of that input, we have seen some very clear themes. We have heard some very clear themes. So while we haven't been out yet having public meetings specific to the transit study, we have heard from the public through these other resources, and we have heard some recurring themes. And just to touch on those briefly, we hear the overwhelming support for analyzing multimodal solutions. That is something that is very encouraging, and certainly has made us pretty happy working on the study. We also have heard the importance of air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and helping to achieve those goals through a better multimodal mix of travel opportunities. We've heard about providing affordable and equitable transportation choices. We have also heard very clearly the request for dedicated funding to expand transit in the corridor. And finally, last but not least, we have also heard about the effects of COVID-19. That's something that has been significant. And those are things that are being considered as we advance the study as well. So in terms of process, we are walking through really a 4-step study process. We started with assessing the gaps in terms of transit service and understanding the need for transit within the study area. We then evaluated the markets, the travel markets between Virginia and Maryland that use the American Legion Bridge, really trying to get a good handle on where people are going to and from to make connections that would be beneficial from a transit perspective. Then we got into, and really what we're wrapping up right now is testing some different concepts, looking at potential transit routing, technology options, and ways that we can use commuter assistance programs and transportation demand management tools really to make travel in the corridor more seamless as these projects advance. That gets us to where We're just on the cusp of now, which is recommending potential improvements. I will go ahead and give you a preview, not to steal Ciara's thunder from the end of the presentation, but we are very close to having those recommendations ready. We anticipate releasing draft recommendations for public comment in early December. Those recommendations would be certainly subject to a public comment period. We want to hear input from the public. And then we're also in the process of scheduling a public meeting just on those transit recommendations to get your input on those recommendations before we finalize the study early next year. So what we're going to walk you through in the next few slides, I'm going to turn it over to Ciara, who's our project manager. We've also got our partners from Maryland on the line as well this evening. She's going to walk you through these steps in a little bit more detail, share with you what we have learned as we have worked on the technical aspects of the study and what lies ahead. So I'm going to turn it over to Ciara.
Thanks, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So now that Jen walked through the study process, I'm going to start with the needs and gaps. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So as I'm sure we're all aware, I-495 is a heavily congested corridor. It's one of the most congested roadways in Maryland and Virginia, and traffic is forecasted to increase in the future. And as you can see in the graphic on the right, traffic across the bridge during the evening peak hour in the 2045 model comes to a standstill with travel speeds less than 20 miles per hour for more than 6 miles of roadway. So with that in mind, we see that there's a need for transit and TDM solutions in conjunction with the planned, managed, and express lanes to efficiently and effectively service transit across the bridge. Next slide, please. So related to transit service, we're all familiar with the transit and rail networks in the region serving the local jurisdictions as well as commuter services. On a typical weekday, more than 11,000 scheduled bus trips cross the study area. Most of the bus service remains on local roads, although some commuter routes travel directly on I-270, I-495, I-66, and I-95. And so the takeaway from this map of bus services is that none of these services currently cross the bridge between Maryland and Virginia. Next slide, please. So this study is assessing the overall demand for transit across the bridge. As you can see from this map, high quality transit service is supported by local comprehensive plans such as Fairfax County and Montgomery County, as well as the regional MWCOG Visualized 2045 plan. The parking needs associated with these routes were also identified as part of these plans. Next slide, please. So once we assessed the needs and gaps, we then evaluated the markets between Virginia and Maryland that use the American Legion Bridge. We wanted to find out where people are going to and from. So in terms of travel demand, we've realized that there's significant travel between activity centers on the Maryland 355 corridor in Silver Spring and Maryland to Virginia destinations like Tysons, Dunloring, and the Virginia Route 7 corridor. A great deal of transit services operate in the study area. However, there are no transit services today that directly link the major activity centers. It's also important to note that there is less travel demand from Virginia to activity centers in the Maryland study area, and the demand that does exist is geographically spread out. Almost 2/3 of all of the trips between the states and the study area are produced by Maryland. Next slide, please. So the next step was developing and testing the transit routes, technology options that would make it more appealing for people to use transit, as well as the commuter assistance programs. In terms of objectives, we're looking to develop potential transit routes that connect areas of high travel demand and use existing or planned HOV and managed express lanes. Some of the things that we considered were the decision to include multiple stops versus point-to-point service, service during peak periods versus all day, as well as the number of buses and routes. As we've worked on looking at daily origin and destination pair trips, we've come up with a range of potential recommendations that will narrow down through a more quantitative analysis. For each of these key destinations, so as you see on the slide, you have on the Virginia side, Tysons, Reston, Dunloring, and Arlington. We have a number of transit options. It's important to keep in mind that some of these options may not warrant further evaluation if they don't meet the main objectives of the study or if they overlap with other existing options that are already available. So this slide shows the evaluated routes that have insufficient travel demand along the corridor, as you can see in orange, and then you'll notice there are a few options that have stars next to them, and those route connections have been advanced for additional testing. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the methodology, the prioritization methodology. The potential routes were scored relative to each other based on 3 categories. So the first one is productivity. Are these routes maximizing ridership for the lowest cost? So under that category, we're looking at cost per trip. We're looking at trips, so the number of trips per day on the route. We're looking at boardings per hour, and we're looking at capital cost per boarding, so the total fleet cost divided by trips. The next category is equity. Are these routes serving areas with high concentrations of low income and minority individuals? For this category, we're looking at minority population served and low income population served. And then the last category is connectivity. So are these routes providing access to the most jobs and people? So for this category, we took a look at total jobs served, population served, and transit connectivity. So now that I went over our prioritization methodology, I'm just going to walk through the preliminary potential transit routes and the next steps. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I'll start with the Bethesda to Tysons route. This route includes service in both directions during peak periods, offering several existing and planned transit and rail connections. This route received a high score in terms of maximizing ridership for the lowest cost. However, not as high when it comes to equity. The next route is Germantown to Tysons. You go to the next slide, please. This route recommends service from Germantown to Tysons during the AM peak period and Tysons to Germantown during the PM peak period. This route scored the highest in terms of equity. The next route is Gaithersburg to Tysons. This route scored the highest in all 3 categories. This route recommends service from Gaithersburg to Tysons during the AM peak period and Tysons to Gaithersburg during the PM peak period. Majority of these trips seem to come from Westfield's Montgomery Mall Transit Center to Tysons Corner Metro Rail Station. The next route is Silver Spring to Tysons. This route recommends service from Silver Spring to Tysons during the AM peak period and Tysons to Silver Spring during the PM peak period, offering several existing and planned transit and rail connections. This route scored the highest in the equity category, as you can see on the slide. The next route is the Frederick to Tysons route. This route recommends service from Frederick to Tysons during the AM peak period and Tysons to Frederick during the PM peak period. This route also scored the highest in the equity category, followed by connectivity and then productivity with the lowest score. The next route is Frederick to Arlington. So this route recommends service from Frederick to Arlington during the AM peak period and Arlington to Frederick during the PM peak period. The next route is Bethesda to Reston. This route recommends service in both directions during peak periods, and this route scored the highest in the connectivity category. And then the final route is Bethesda to Dunloring via Tysons. This route has strong ridership potential with bi-directional service and scored the highest in the productivity and connectivity categories. So if you go to the next slide, please. This slide shows the overall ranking based on the proposed methodology. As you can see, the Bethesda to Dunloring via Tysons, the Bethesda to Tysons, and the Gaithersburg to Tysons scored the best. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, the 8 preliminary routes were compared relative to each other based on their scores of productivity, equity, and connectivity. The productivity score includes one metric, and that's trips per day that was weighted a little higher than the others. So we just want to ensure that we're maintaining a focus on prioritizing routes that have the potential to yield the highest ridership. And the rank is based on a total score that combines all three elements. Just keep in mind that this ranking is not a final list of routes. Right now, these consider each route individually, and this will help us in our next step of creating and modeling packages of these routes that work together as a system. Next slide, please. So in addition to transit options, we're looking at a range of technology and commuter assistance program options. These options will also be screened to identify any fatal flaws and that would preclude a recommendation from advancing. We just want to make sure that there's no overlapping of these programs. And so for these programs, we're looking at things like readiness and cost. We're also looking at commuter assistance program options in addition to the ones that already serve the corridor. But in this case, we're looking at more targeted outreach to users of the corridor. Next slide, please. So this is just a study timeline. We're currently finalizing the modeling of the transit options and developing costs for the potential recommendations. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll be refining the potential recommendations. And then we'll have a draft report available for public comment in December. Next slide, please. So we just want to emphasize that keeping track of this study is easy. We have a webpage on the DRPT website under major initiatives. All of the study materials are posted for review, including our stakeholder presentations and minutes. And we've also included a comment link on the webpage that can be used for public comment. And with that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Jennifer. We are now going to go ahead and open it up to questions on the DRPT study. And we're having a slight technical problem. If you can just bear with us for a moment. We're going to be opening the chat function, but I'll quickly go over with you again how to ask your questions. You can either do it by using the chat feature, writing your question in on the chat feature, and then either Jennifer or Sierra will read your question aloud, and then they will respond. Or if you'd like to state your question yourself, just go ahead and write that in the chat message and let us know that. Please limit it to one question at a time. And if you have more than one question, we'll get back to you once everyone has had a turn. And if you're calling in by phone and you want to ask a question, just press *3. That'll indicate that you're raising your hand. We'll add you to the queue, and then we'll unmute you when it's your turn to ask your question. And then once you're done, we'll ask you to hit *3 again to go ahead and lower your hand. Okay, do we have the chat feature on and working? Okay, it is. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jennifer and Sierra, are you able to see those questions coming into you?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
do you want
we
to?
can see 'em.
Great.
Sure. So the first question is, the study includes what transit options: road, bus, rapid transit on dedicated lanes, or light rail? And Sarah, would you like to speak to that and how we have narrowed down the options available?
Sure. So right now, it just there aren't any bus rapid transit options and no light rail. We assessed the overall demand for transit during the study, and we used the most recent TPB COG model. So right now we're just at regular bus service and commuter bus service. I don't know, Jen, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think as Sarah stated in the presentation, we really started with the regional plans that COG has in place, and then the comprehensive plans from the local government for what was envisioned for transit. That is largely bus-based transit based on those previous studies that were already in place. So the next question has to do with the analysis and how much does the travel time on Maryland 355 between downtown Bethesda and the Beltway increase as the result of building toll lanes on the Beltway. That is not part of our transit study, but we will pass that question along to Maryland for them to address at a later point. So question, why don't any of these transit lines exist today? There's a clear need. I think a straightforward answer to that question is, right now we're talking about bi-state transit. So having a coordinated study that includes both Maryland and Virginia is a very good place to start with those types of transit alternatives. I think the second point is that right now, if we added, for example, bus transit, that those buses would be sitting in the same traffic with passenger vehicles and single occupant vehicles that are on the American Legion Bridge. So the additional capacity that's associated with the bridge and the managed lane projects in Maryland and the 495 next project provides us with the opportunity for faster travel times and more competitive travel times. Definitely, we are also seeing that clear need for additional transit. Michelle, we have Jackson Hurst that would like to state a question. Could we open,
Yes,
open their line?
yeah, Michelle's having to reboot real quick with a tech issue. But yeah, okay. If we want to go, Jackson, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go right ahead.
Thanks, Justin.
Hi. The only question that I have regarding the I-495 transit/TDM study is, it's mainly for Sierra since she's a project manager. I was wondering if I could be signed up to receive study updates and be added to a mailing list for the study. If need be, I can put my info in the chat function and you can just take it down that way, or I can just send you an email.
Next.
Mr. Hurst, I'll actually put my email address in the chat. And if you wouldn't mind just shooting me an email, and I'll make sure that you get those updates.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will just add that we do have on our webpage the public comment feature, and if you would like for us to add you to a mailing list so that we can notify you when the draft recommendations become available and are out for public comment, that way we can get that information directly to you. So Ciara's contact information is also on that webpage, and then there is a public comment feature as well. So that is available for anybody who would like that direct contact.
Ciara and Jennifer, Supervisor Faust would like to ask a question.
Sure.
I don't know if you can see that in the chat function, or Supervisor Faust, if you'd
Can
like
you
to
hear me?
unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay. First thing I would like to say is that Delegate Murphy called me right before this meeting commenced, and she was called into a meeting with the Attorney General. So as soon as that meeting's over, she's going to join us. She hasn't missed much of these proceedings, as many people know. And I do want to say thank you very, very much for the focus on transit as part of the resolution of the Beltway mess that we have. The questions I have, and they're kind of practical, I think, parking at the point of origination. In other words, do you assume that cars come to Tysons to get on buses to go to Bethesda, or do your assumptions that all people using transit will be residents of Tysons and or have transit access to Tysons?
I'd say based on our analysis, most of the commuters are coming from Maryland into Virginia.
So, well, the buses aren't going to run empty from Tysons to Bethesda, right?
Right. Well, there are a couple routes that are bi-directional. I don't have them right in front of me, but yes, there are a couple routes from Tysons to Bethesda. I'm trying to think what the other route is. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Supervisor,
Okay.
yeah, Supervisor Faust, we definitely look at parking and connections with other transit routes. Ideally, we want to make it as seamless as possible for people to be able to travel. One of the challenges with the analysis for this particular study is to CR's point, because there's more travel coming from Maryland to Virginia for work in Virginia. That means some of those routes may not function in a bidirectional. They may not go back and forth because there's just not enough demand to warrant that. But that's one of the things that we're looking at in the analysis that's being done right now.
Okay. Well, in terms of completing your analysis, there is no transit parking in Tysons. I would like to see that change, but at this point, the investment in the local distribution network, when you deliver all these people from Bethesda to Tysons, do your studies assume the existing transit distribution network, or do you assume some enhanced version to get these people to their destination?
So we're utilizing the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments 2045 model, which includes all of the transportation recommendations that are included in COG's long-range plan for transit highway are in place. So that would include those planned other transit enhancements that are beyond what's being looked at in this study.
Okay. Well, I'll follow up with you separately. My question would be, does COG assume these transit that you're studying? Because it seems to me crazy. Okay.
The COG model does.
Were any of your transit studies that you're looking at included in the traffic studies that we have been working with for 495 next? Or are these with any improvements that result from what you're doing make the 495 next traffic studies work better?
So our analysis is not included in the baseline for 495 next, but it's intended to make 495 next work better.
Okay, so the 495 next traffic studies do not incorporate a transit component like this, like what you're studying?
Not one that goes across the American Legion Bridge, no.
Okay, thank you.
And Supervisor Faust, this is Rob Carey. If I could just jump in on that, and I think it is important. That's why this parallel study being underway is so important, and why we wanted to do this joint meeting, because their recommendations are coming up very quickly. And without their recommendations, we wouldn't have factored that in that way. But once we have recommendations, then that gives us a basis to look at what would be appropriate to incorporate there. And I don't know if Abby, you want to add anything, or Susan to that from the VDOT team.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I want to mention is that the modeling, the COG model, assumes a certain level of utilizations by carpoolers and van pullers of the express lanes, as well as certain level of utilization by transit vehicles. So it's not as detailed and specific as what the transit study is providing to us with some direct routes, but there is an underlying assumption that there's certain level of utilization by carpoolers, van pullers, and transit vehicles will be on those express lanes, and that is correct. That is shown in the regional model.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, thank you, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with you as we go forward.
Thank you. We have a couple more folks that want to ask a question. So Deborah Butler, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hi, how are you? Having spoken with some traffic experts, it seems highly unusual that this study is running concurrently now and not prior to the EA recommendation. We have design plans, we have recommendations, they've been submitted, and now we're backtracking to figure out what are our transit options. Can you please explain why that is the case?
Well, we've been coordinating with VDOT throughout this process. We've, of course, had VDOT on our stakeholder working group, so they've been very involved in what we're doing.
Yes, and the finalization of this is mid-December with recommendations in January, and we already have a plan. We're going to sign a contract. We have maps, we have destruction, and we don't have a transit study that's been submitted in an EA.
So one thing I would just mention, this is Susan Shaw, is that, you know, our EA is for work that is in Virginia. Whereas in Maryland's EIS extends just to tie in with our project in Virginia. So, you know, each of those projects, while they have a component, they don't extend really the full length of what this transit study is doing. And so I think, you know, the transit study is kind of, it is off to the side. Either project can function without the transit work that's going on. I think Jennifer's point is yes, you know, it makes both projects function better, both systems function better. But the transit study really kind of is that glue between both of the two separate NEPA documents.
Susan, that's factually incorrect. Your independent utility is based on the fact that we're moving more people through hot lanes across the American Legion Bridge. We are not. We are moving a funnel a few miles. In fact, people in the general purpose lane, Virginia citizens, will be sitting in more traffic, more congestion, as demonstrated by your own data.
Okay, well, you know, we disagree on that point, but I think
you presented it at a public hearing.
Yeah, let's go ahead and continue. I think there's some more questions on the transit study, and I would ask people to let people ask the questions that they might.
The environmental assessment is incorrect and inadequate. It is based on incomplete data. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Susan, I do want to correct one thing that was said. In the question, it indicated that we're moving on, that we'll sign a contract and we'll do all that stuff before this transit study is complete. That is not accurate. The results of this transit study will be in that December timeframe, December-January timeframe. The NEPA decision from the Federal Highway and approval on that does not come till winter-spring timeframe. And we would not enter a contract with anyone prior to that being completed. So I just want to make the point that the results of this transit study will be in place and available before any contract with anybody would be signed and before we would be in a position to move forward with that. So I just wanted to clarify that one point. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to go back and clarify an answer I gave previously to Mr. Ross about travel times. And the question was specific to travel times on Maryland 355, which I am not in a position to answer. However, a follow-up question was whether or not the buses on the toll lanes would be faster or slower than buses that could run today. And I would say that's the premise of this study. Without the toll lanes, without the additional capacity on the American Legion Bridge, those buses would be sitting in traffic today. The additional capacity and the flexibility that comes from the managed lanes allows those buses to be much more competitive from a time perspective than anything that could run today. So I did want to go back and clarify that.
Okay, so
we do have a number. We do have a number of questions about the Maryland side of the study. We can certainly share those questions with Maryland, and we will also share a link to the information for Maryland as well. I'm trying to make sure that we give everybody that has an opportunity to ask a question before I've asked. Omar Malik, if you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself.
Yes. Hey, I've traveled, and I've seen very congested cities where they use bus rapid transit very successfully on transit lane. I just wanted to commend Maryland on doing the study. And I wanted to point out that they don't need 495 next, and it's 2 miles of hot lanes to make this work. They can run these buses on existing HOV lanes, existing hot lanes all the way to Dunloring. The only stoppage would be on the American Legion Bridge. And if their buses are successful, there'll be less cars coming in from Maryland. So Maryland should definitely run this bus service, and they don't need 495 next to do this. It's only 2 miles of that they're extending to GW Parkway. It's not going to make your bus service successful with Bethesda to Tysons. The infrastructure for that already exists. You can start running your buses on HOV lanes and existing hot lanes. If people actually start using it, it'll alleviate traffic on the American Legion Bridge. Please start that bus service now. You don't have to wait for 495 next.
Thank you. I've got a question about commitment of dedicated transit funding as part of 495 Next. Not sure if Rob or Susan want to address that, but certainly from the DRPT perspective, we have experience working with dedicated transit funding and other corridors with express lanes. We've seen a lot of success with that approach in being able to provide multimodal alternative. Rob or Susan, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, Secretary Valentine is extraordinarily focused on multimodalism across the state transportation network. And as I said, particularly the Northern Virginia region. And I just want to say, relative to transit on this corridor, nothing is off the table. People have maybe indicated through some of the questions that nothing is being provided and so forth. I would say it's premature to say that at this point. I would just say nothing's off the table. I'm not in a position to commit to that tonight, what will come there. But that's a obviously point of active discussions based on the input we're having, and we want to be responsive.
Thanks, Rob. I have a question about the study relying on past regional plans, including the Council of Governments Long Range Plan and comprehensive plans. What year is the information from? The COG Long Range Plan is fairly recent. It will have been within the last 3 or 4 years. Those are required to be updated on a pretty regular cycle. In terms of whether or not those plans reflect recent changes, like the location of Amazon HQ2, that is likely not included in the baseline, but the land development patterns and the economic growth that is projected in the COG Long Range Plan is something that the Council of Governments works on with the local governments, and it would reflect anticipated growth in those areas. I think one of the things that is challenging working on a study like this right now is one of those things that we mentioned that we've heard in the feedback thus far, and that's the impact of COVID-19 on telework patterns, use of transit into the future. Those are things that we can look at from a sensitivity perspective as we prepare to make recommendations, but the the long-range planning models have not quite caught up with those recent changes yet. All right, I'm scrolling through, making sure that I'm not missing anybody. So question from Stuart Schwartz. Why haven't Virginia and Maryland studied a comprehensive transit, whether it's bus with dedicated lanes or metro, land use, or transportation demand alternative? I think that is a good question, Stuart. It's something that is, that rail or metro alternative is something that's not been contemplated in the long range plans. It's certainly, the type of transit alternative that comes with its own challenges. In terms of land use and TOD, of course, that is something that's hard on the transportation side necessarily to jump into that study. But this is the first time we've really had the opportunity to partner on equal footing with Maryland to look at transit in the corridor. And the timing of that is with these, with the hot lanes and with the opportunity that's provided by the American Legion Bridge project. And I'm hoping I'm not missing.
Hey, Jen, this is Zachary Giselle from MDOT-MTA, the Maryland Transit Administration. I didn't know I could just unmute myself and join in. I'm trying to scroll through these questions. I see one from Mark Schloeffler, probably misspelling that, missaying that, asking about transit stations in the middle of the highway to improve efficiency of the transit routes, for example, next to Montgomery Mall. Now I see actually Ben Ross beat me to the punch here. On our side, it assumes that the buses will indeed get off of the managed lanes to visit those locations, whether they're park and rides or other transit stations, and not assuming at this point construction of any stations within the highway. The second question I saw was Ben Ross asking about Maryland 355. I don't know that answer. I put my email out there to follow up and be able to connect you with the 495-270 managed lane study team to see how they managed the potential traffic added by the toll lanes on 355. I don't know that answer.
Thank you so much, Zach. We're glad you're with us this evening.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be at a Virginia meeting without leaving my house.
Rob, there's a question in the chat about the status of the bi-state accord that was announced last November. Do you want to speak to that one?
I'm happy. Can you read that to me? I don't see it right. I mean, there's a lot of questions here. I might have missed that one.
Sure. It's what is the status of the bi-state accord announced last November? Is there any written document at this time?
Yeah, and I'll certainly ask Susan Shaw, who manages all the mega projects in the Northern Virginia area, to jump in as well. But as was stated earlier, the bi-state accord between Governor Northam and Governor Hogan was announced. And since that point in time, our team from the Secretaries of Transportation for both states down through our commissioner with the Department of Transportation and the state highway administrator with the state Maryland State Highway Administration and design teams have been actively working together to look at what that looks like, what the scope of that might be. Susan has been actively involved in that. I just more than anything want to make it clear that both Maryland and Virginia have continuously indicated their commitment to bringing that project to fruition. That is accurate today as it was the day that that accord was announced. And we continue on both sides to work towards bringing that to fruition. Susan might be able to speak more to the details because she's actually on some of the involved in all of those meetings. Susan, is there anything else you would add to that?
No, other than that, we continue to be guided by the announcement of agreement between the two governors and the statements that they made. We're using that as a guideline to to frame our discussions. And so we don't have anything in writing between the two states that's in any kind of, form right now. We are exchanging information with each other, asking questions, trying to get through some of the detail, but being guided by that overall announcement that was made and the details within that announcement.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that these discussions are very active. I know that our commissioner was on the phone with the highway administrator for Maryland yesterday morning. So I would just say they're regularly talking and meeting on these things. So progress is definitely being made.
Thanks, Rob and Susan. Question, will a similar study be done for the Woodrow Wilson Bridge? The bridge has a dedicated transit lane that has not been utilized for the past 10 years. Without dedicated transit funding, the American Legion Bridge transit would probably be the same. And I think that is why we're doing this study. To my knowledge, there wasn't a specific demand study done with Woodrow Wilson Bridge that predates my time with DRPT, though. But that's really what we're trying to do with this study, is inform the discussion so that if there is demand, we can hopefully get to a position where we could potentially see some type of funding to support transit service like we have in the other corridors around the Commonwealth. We've at DRPT, we have done similar studies on the I-66 corridor and on the I-95 corridor in Northern Virginia. All right, Michelle, do we have a phone question?
Yes, we do. Before we switch over to that phone question, I wanted to let everyone know that if you have any further questions for the DRPT team, now is the time to go ahead and write them in or raise your hand, because once we get through the next questions, we'll go ahead and move forward with the meeting and go on to the VDOT presentation on the 495 Northern Extension Project. But at this time, we'll go ahead and open it up to the phone question. It's the phone number ending in the 2 digits of 95. If you would go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. Can you unmute that caller?
It appears that you are unmuted. You want to go ahead, caller?
Okay. We're not hearing the caller. So we apologize for that. We will be able to get to your question later in the meeting. We'll try back with you again. At this time, we're going to go ahead and switch over to our VDOT presenters. And I believe Susan Shaw is going to kick that off and then hand that over to Abby Lerner. So Karen, if you would go to the next slide, please.
And actually, Abby's going to start off, so we switched it up tonight.
Okay, one moment. We do have another question for the DRPT team that just came in. So if we want to go ahead and do that. This is another caller, phone number ending in the digit 73. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
April Georgeless. I just have a follow-up comment to Omar's comment about this transit could go forward using what we have now that you're looking at without doing 495 next for many, many, many reasons. 495 next just doesn't make sense for us right now in any shape or form. But the one thing that would help this transit to go forward is very simple, and it will also help the choke point at the GW choke point merge mess area before the American Legion Bridge. Everybody keeps saying it's the bridge, it's the bridge. The choke point before the GW is Virginia's nightmare, which will be made worse by 495 next. The simple solution and helpful for this transit plan to go forward, perhaps now, is to shut down the shoulder lane, hot lane extension. Everyone knows, except VDOT and some of our officials, they refuse to admit that this has created that choke point mess. Ever since that shoulder lane, hot lane extension went in, we have had nothing but nightmare traffic, and our rush hours are not just a couple of hours a day. They used to be from 10 in the morning, 9 in the morning, up to 8 at night. So that is a very simple solution, but VDOT doesn't want to stop the shoulder lane because guess what? They did it with intent without public meetings or public knowledge in order to create this mess because they want hot lanes up to the bridge. It's unconscionable. And the shoulder lane, hot lane extension should be stopped immediately. And the other thing that should be stopped immediately is the December 4th public comment deadline, which is insane. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we're nowhere near to have that as a cutoff for a public comment when our public comments since May 20th, 2019 have not even been posted and answered. And we have not had the public meetings we need to see all of the changes since May 20th of 2019. And the officials know they're supposed to be receiving a list of all these changes. Have they gotten it? Have we gotten it? No, there are some simple solutions right now. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, April. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Abby Lerner from VDOT. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Abby Lerner with the Virginia Department of Transportation in the Mega Project section in Northern Virginia. So I'm gonna go over some aspects of the 495 Northern Extension project. We'll give a very brief overview, talk about some of the environmental analysis that have been conducted, talk a little bit about the public outreach efforts, some of the concerns that we have heard from the public in our previous question and answer sessions, as well as the public hearings. We'll talk about our partnership with Transurban, the regional coordination with Maryland. We touched a little bit on that, and we'll go over schedules and next steps. Next slide. So in terms of project overview, the project extends the express lanes from its existing terminus around the area of the Dollar Store Road to the George Washington Memorial Parkway in the vicinity of the American Legion Bridge. As a result of the placement of the express lanes, some of the bridges need to be replaced. So we're going to be replacing bridges along the corridor. We'll also be adding a bike and pedestrian trail. This bike and pedestrian trail is included in the Fairfax County Comprehensive Plan. And so this project would construct that shared use path. As a result of the construction of the project, we're going to be replacing existing noise walls and constructing new walls to mitigate the impacts on noise associated with the construction of the project. We're also going to be providing stormwater management facilities. The goals and objectives of the project is to reduce congestion, provide additional travel choices, improve travel reliability, and enhance safety. Next slide. So you can see the graphic on the right side of this slide shows the level of congestion in a typical day. This one was for 8 people a day in 2019. We were collecting data, but it shows a great deal of congestion on the Capitol Beltway. And this one was taken during the PM peak period, but this is one of the most congested corridors in the region. So the express lanes will provide new capacity. There are 2 lanes in each direction added to the Capitol Beltway, and they will provide, in terms of project benefits, new travel choices. So this facility will provide a running way for carpools, van pools, and transit vehicles to be able to provide a reliable and faster trips than what could be accomplished under the current congested conditions. It will help reduce travel times during the peak periods. And one of the most important benefits associated with the project is the reduction of cut-through traffic on local roads. With the provision of the express lanes, the extension of the express lanes, some of the current traffic that uses the local roads to cut through will now have a way to get to Maryland faster without having to go through McLean roads or Great Falls roads. So the express lanes provides that ability to reduce that traffic on the local roads. And it will also improve safety in the study area by taking cars off those local roads and reducing some weaving movements that are currently in the existing configuration of the Capitol Beltway. And with the elimination of those weaving movements, you are going to improve safety in the corridor. Next slide. So in terms of traffic analysis results and the benefits on the traffic operations, one of the things that our traffic analysis shows is that with the implementation of the express lanes, you're going to be able to move more people through the corridor. Our analysis indicates that in 2045, we can move approximately 7,600 more people per hour in both directions. This is in the corridor in the area from the Dulles Stove Road to the other side of the American Legion Bridge. In 2025, with the implementation of the Maryland project, which includes the replacement of the American Legion Bridge and the provision of managed lanes on the bridge, you can move approximately 5,400 more people per hour in both directions. We conducted a sensitivity analysis for the condition between the extension of the express lanes in Virginia, but prior to the replacement of the bridge. And our analysis indicates that in 2025, prior to the Maryland managed lane system being in place, you can still move 2,500 more people per hour in both directions in the corridor. And so we anticipate, based on what Maryland has presented, that the bridge reconstruction will not be ready by 2025. At this time, based on the latest information that we have received from Maryland, is more like a 2027 timeframe. So there will be a couple of years when you're moving 2,500 more people per hour. But then after that bridge project is completed, then you're going to be moving approximately 5,400 more people per hour. I mentioned that the implementation of this project will help reduce cut-through traffic on the local roads. The graphic that is shown here indicates that in red is where additional traffic, where traffic increases, and the green is where traffic decreases. And this one is for the condition with 2025 bill prior to the opening of the Maryland managed lane system. And even prior to that opening, you see that what is happening is some of the traffic is moving to the freeway environment and away from the local streets, and that's what our regional models are indicating. With respect to travel reliability, prior to the Maryland project being implemented, we expect to see a 5 to 24 minute decrease in travel time on the northbound I-495 express lane. So if you take the express lanes, you're gonna see a reduction in your travel time. We are expecting an increase in the travel time in the northbound during the PM peak hours, and that increase is 4 to 6 minutes. This is 4 to 6 minutes out of the trip that generally takes about 30 to 35 minutes, and that is between the Route 123 and Clara Barton Parkway. That increase in the travel time on the general purpose lane is primarily the result of moving that traffic away from the local street to the freeway environment. So when you move those vehicles to the freeway environment, some of them are going to be on the express lanes, some of them are going to be on the general purpose lanes, but by the time you get to the American Legion Bridge, you're going to merge that traffic. That creates some friction, and it creates that additional travel time for the vehicles on the general purpose lanes. Keep in mind, once again, that we're moving more people, we're moving more vehicles, and those vehicles are currently using the local street. So we're improving significantly traffic conditions on the local streets. Once the Maryland project is implemented, then we see decreases in travel time, both on the express lanes as well as on the general purpose lanes.
Hey, Abby, if I could jump in, I did just, given all the discussion around the bus service across there and so forth, I know in the past there was bus service and it did struggle because of there really was no travel time savings with that. And I do think it's important to note here with the express lanes that 5 to 24 minute decrease in travel time, even without the Maryland project. And, you know, I would defer obviously to the transit experts on this, but you saw the study earlier. I don't know what their final recommendations were, but there's certainly some things that look promising in that regard. And certainly having up to a 24-minute savings, that may be significant in terms of the viability of transit for people to make that choice. I didn't want to let that go by without talking about the beneficial aspects of that for transit in particular.
Thank you, Rob. That's a very good point. Next slide. So we have been going out to the public, reaching out with information regarding this project. We started with a public meeting in June of 2018. Approximately 70 people attended. There was a second public meeting in May of 2019 with 225 people attending. We've had question and answer sessions in late September of 2020. The combine was approximately 170 people for those two meetings. For the public hearing, we had a virtual public hearing in October of 2020, 170 people attended. And then we had in-person public hearing with 25 people attending. The comment period for the public hearing ends on December 4, 2020. We're having this joint public meeting between the RPT and VDOT. In addition, we've had a number of meetings with elected officials, stakeholders, property owners, homeowner associations. We continue to schedule meetings with homeowner associations, and we will continue to make ourselves available to present information about the public and to answer any questions that those associations have about the project. And Susan is going to take it over at the next slide.
Thanks, Abby. And I would just mention, we've done a very proactive outreach to those surrounding communities, gathering contact information, working with the local supervisors' offices, so that we're actually, communicating with those groups to see if they would like us to come to a meeting. We're not waiting for them to contact us. So I wanted to just summarize at a high level some of the comments or common themes that we have been hearing as concerns from the input that we've been receiving. And this is not comprehensive. If you don't see your specific concern listed, it doesn't mean that we haven't received it. These are just some of the ones that we're seeing repeat comments on. And so we just wanted to highlight a few of these. So we did hear a lot from especially direct impact communities about the location of the bicycle trail or the shared use path, which is generally, it's located behind the noise wall between Lewinsville Road and Live Oak Drive. And so there were concerns about where it was close to communities, what type of privacy or security would be provided or barrier, since this is located behind the sound wall. And so we are working with those communities to see what options we have. There was also a concern about impact to trees. We did identify with the initial phase of the project, approximately 35 acres are anticipated to be affected. The entire project, which includes the larger footprint of ramps, which is in the environmental document, are largely located within the Dulles Toll Road interchange area, which I'll show you in just a moment. But we have committed to doing a tree survey during construction or prior to any tree removal on the project, but it would be done during construction, and that tree survey will be used to identify the types of species of trees that we should be focused on replanting in areas where we can do that. We also heard of concern about stormwater management and impacts to Scotts Run. Scotts Run in this vicinity is a stream that goes along the Beltway. It sits below the watershed of Tysons, feeds into this stream, and it's significantly degraded. We do have about 3,000 linear feet of stream that is impacted by our project. About 70% of the stream that we're impacting is degraded. And so we are making improvements in the corridor. We did go out, we met in the field with Fairfax County staff and our partners to identify what those areas were, what type of collaboration we could do with the county. And we've made a commitment for some stream restoration that is actually exceeds what would normally be required or otherwise be required by our permitting agencies. And then we're also have committed to providing enhanced outfalls at several locations where there's crossing pipes that are being extended. Noise walls, we've heard some concerns about those, impacts to COVID-19, and then modifications to the Dulles Toll Road interchange. And I do have some follow-up slides on those. So in terms of noise, on the next slide, you can see some of the concern that we've had. We do have 9 existing walls that will be impacted by the project and need to be relocated. Those will be replaced at the same elevation or higher than what they are today. And in some cases, the materials of the walls will be improved. The walls that we construct will be, generally speaking, will be concrete walls, but they will have an absorptive finish on the highway side of the road, which helps to dampen the noise as it comes off of the highway. And some of the walls that you see out there today do not have that kind of surface on them. 3 of those existing walls will get extended farther than what they are today. And then there's a new wall that's been identified. This is all based on our preliminary noise study. A final noise study will be done during final design. On the next slide, you can just see a graphic that shows what traffic volumes were like in the earlier part of the year, pre-COVID. So you can see those lines for Northern Virginia in yellow and then statewide in black. This is looking at our permanent count station data, which we do not have a permanent count station within our 3-mile section of the 495 extension that we are looking at doing. But this just shows generally where we saw that big dip in March and April, and then how those volumes have continued to kind of climb back. We are sitting at just roughly around 85 to 90%, depends on where you are in the corridor, of pre-COVID levels. And we are doing a sensitivity analysis to look at and try to project what we think might be a post COVID traffic situation. We do feel that there are some patterns that we're seeing change, especially in terms of telework. But we're also seeing that those have some impact on volumes, but it seems to be fairly limited. But we are going to take a look at that and assess what the impacts specifically in this corridor are. So the next 3 slides kind of will walk us through what is in each of these phases in our NEPA document at the Dulles Toll Road interchange. So we had quite a few concerns expressed around what was being proposed. So in the phase 1, which is the initial phase of construction, we do have some new ramps that provide better access from eastbound Dulles Toll Road to northbound express lanes. And these are being constructed to address some current congestion issues that we see on the Dulles Toll Road as you head north on the Capitol Beltway. So those are included in our phase 1 work. On the next slide, you can see a few additional ramps that are being considered potentially in a phase 2. Phase 2 for us is at least 2030 or later. So this is still 10 years away. It would be post when Maryland is in place and there really is a demonstrated need for the additional connectivity that you see. The ramps that you see that would be coming from southbound 495, and I should just to orient people, I'm sorry I didn't do that before, but north is to the right, so you would be heading towards Maryland, heading to the right there, and then you can see this is the Dulles Toll Road as it connects with the Capitol Beltway. That gray bridge and roadway network, that is the new connection at Jones Branch, which was just completed here a short time ago. So just to orient yourself. So these are potentially included in a later phase of the project, no sooner than 2030, and as needs are identified. So we would wait to see what the traffic flows were based on our modeling. We anticipate we might need these in the 2030 timeframe. And then the last slide shows a much larger footprint with additional ramps that were actually studied back in the 2009-2010 timeframe. All of these connections are in the constrained long-range plan. They are in our NEPA study, but we have worked with FHWA. Normally in a NEPA study or an environmental study, you need to identify funding for everything that you have in your document. But in this case, we said we anticipate the need for this to be so much in the future that we want to separate this out. We included it in our NEPA study. It is also included in our traffic report, but the earliest that we anticipate any of the future phase construction to happen would not be until 2045 or later. So this is a very far look into the future. These later phases are not funded by our project. So we anticipate that either additional public funding or P3 type funding would need to be looked at the time when anyone would decide to implement these. Just briefly, we are in have a agreement with Transurban. It is a framework agreement that we are working under. We have not signed any final deal yet. As Rob Carey mentioned, we don't anticipate that until later in 2021. Right now we are working out what are the requirements for a proposal, a binding proposal that we will provide those requirements to Transurban, and then they would need to meet those criteria for us to accept their proposal. And so in the meantime, VDOT remains responsible for the environmental studies, the traffic study, which we call the interchange justification report, and for coordinating with federal, state, and local agencies. Transurban is providing the preliminary engineering and design. They're working to procure a design builder. Once we sign a deal, they would be responsible to construct the project and of course have a finance plan and then to operate and maintain the roadway. I think we've talked about our regional coordination. We're coordinating both our environmental studies, our traffic studies, making sure that both projects are compatible. We want to make sure that what we build in Virginia will help support the delivery of Maryland's project. And then, as we mentioned, we do have this Capital Beltway Accord, which is an agreement between the two states about how we would finance and operate and work together to deliver these projects between the GW Memorial Parkway and River Road.
Hey, Susan, if I could just jump in to that point on the last slide. I just wanted to, number one, thank Zach from the Maryland Transit Administration for being on and DRPT. But I think tonight has been a great example. You see all these various coordinations that are happening on the VDOT side, similar coordinations happening on the transit side. We also at the top level of VDOT, the top level of DRPT, the top level of the Maryland State Highway Administration and their transit administration, and then at the secretary and governor level in each state, there are ongoing continuous conversations about all of this. So I just wanted to say that because I think that tonight having both parties on the call is really helpful to hopefully dispel some of the rumor that we're disconnected somehow, because it's just not accurate. We're working very closely together. So I just did want to add that. Thanks, Susan.
Hey, Rob, thanks for making that point. I just want to chime in and say, I'm Zach Chazelle from the Maryland Transit Administration. I'm also joined tonight by Dusty Holcomb, who's representing the managed lane study. And as that's housed kind of quarterbacked in a different office in our State Highway Administration. So just wanted to add that. He's with me tonight.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the participation, and I think the bi-state cooperation on all this is what's going to deliver solutions that solve a decades-long problem out there.
Certainly.
All right, and then this just shows our schedule. We are wrapping up our work here, getting comments, and closing that out here in December 4th. We anticipate that we would have a decision from FHWA and a traffic study approval in early next year, and a final contract after that time. And so with that, I think we're ready to open it to questions. And, I think I will just say from our standpoint, I think it's somewhat of a, if you have a transit question or a roadway question, either one is fine. I think we wanted to make sure that first group of questions, that there was plenty of time to get some of these transit questions answered, since we've had a number of Q&A sessions on our project already. Are we going back to Michelle? Yeah.
Susan, the first, where we left off in the chat box with the questions, we'd like to start there. And the question reads, would it have made logical sense to have had a framework before the independent state DOTs made their plans, rather than hot lanes as the answer and backing into the proof?
Well, I would just say for Virginia, we looked at a build and a no build. We already have managed lanes. That was our system already in place. I think Maryland, their study had a much broader look. They started with an EIS with a whole host of alternatives. So, they have a number that they've narrowed down, all of which now do include possibility for managed lanes on the Beltway. So, I think all of these efforts, it kind of just it's somewhat of an iterative process. And I think, there was just a point where Maryland needed to kind of go through their NEPA process to get to the point where they're at today. And so, for us, it's a simpler process in a sense, since we already have a system in place that we are just extending.
Yeah, and Susan, I would just add that, as you said, I mean, our footprint in terms of what the Beltway looks like is pretty well set. I mean, this is the, 2.5 miles or so between the toll road and going up towards the American Legion Bridge. Maryland's still working on theirs, obviously, with their environmental impact statement. But I do think that, as you mentioned, it's an iterative process, and I would say that in this case, anybody who has been involved with that choke point over the decades, I would just argue to not let perfect get in the way of good. I mean, this is tremendous progress. You've got both states pulling in the same direction to make something happen. What that something is what this is all about, is to figure out what the best solution is. But I will say, to Susan's point, with the footprint that we find in Virginia that has worked really highly successfully to move more people every day, not vehicles, but person throughput. That's what we're focused on. I think that it makes sense for us to look at, the footprint that we have, and then obviously we have a no build option along with that, and then also looking at these transit alternatives and really seeing what comes out of the transit study to see what, again, the best alternative overall for a comprehensive package is.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, why has Maryland not considered highway bus stations improve transit usage? Building stations with the highway improvements is more cost-effective option. At the very least, leave space in the median for future projects. For example, I-66.
I'll take that to start, and then I'll try and encourage Dusty. I think I see him in the attendees here to speak from the P3, the Managed Lanes Project perspective, because the Transit TDM service study that Ciara and I are co-leading is focused really just on the services. Again, taking the managed lanes as a given in the future, how could we leverage that investment to introduce transit to take advantage of that investment? Well, I wasn't participating in the P3 project. Personally, I know from my seat at the MTA that there was a transit work group as associated with that planning exercise. And again, that footprint, what was looked at for the managed lanes, was much broader than just the American Legion Bridge. Included I-270, looking over many counties in Maryland. And through that planning process, looking through what the concept would be for the design, there was a parallel process looking at what transit solutions there were. And that report is online. It's kind of a funky URL, but if you just Google transit work group P3 project, you should get there. Actually, I can drop the link in the text, and that runs through a series of about, I think, 15 different transit options to be considered in parallel with that managed lanes project. But in terms of the actual infrastructure and considering stations in that infrastructure package, I think Dusty may be more suited to speak to how that was considered or included or not included.
Zach, thanks. Yeah. So in the environmental document, everybody knows the corridor here is a very constrained corridor. I am not aware of any specific look at inline stations, either on the 270 corridor or on the 495 corridor. Again, one of the focuses of the environmental document is try to reduce the impacts along the adjacent properties, private property, parks, and other things. I can certainly bring it back to the environmental team to see if they've looked at this and provide more information to Susan and Abby from our team.
I do want to validate kind of the suggestion though, because as part of this transit service study over 495 American Legion Bridge, a big challenge is getting from the managed lanes to the sources, whether it's a park and ride or the job centers, and that does impact how we are considering the effectiveness of the various routes. So it's definitely on point. The managed lanes are great to get you, along the 495 corridor, but then how do you get off of that corridor into where the actual jobs are, where the park and rides are?
Right. Okay, thank you to our Maryland partners. We're going to go to the phones and try to take that question that we were unable to take earlier. The phone number with the last two digits, 95. If you're there and you still would like to ask a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay. All righty. Okay, we're going to go ahead back to the chat box. Okay, the next question is from Mark Scheffler. Was a trail connection between Lewinsville Road and Scotts Crossing Road considered as part of the project through the I-495 Dulles Toll Road interchange? It seems like a missed opportunity. Susan or Robbie?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we have been focusing on meeting, I guess, providing the pedestrian and bicycle facilities within the corridor. We understand that additional connections will be needed as part of the comprehensive plan. There are additional trails that are shown in the comprehensive plan. We have been trying to work on the implementation of the facility that is associated with the study area and with the facility that we are constructing, with an understanding that Fairfax County will continue to implement additional facilities that are in conjunction with what's shown in the comprehensive plan for additional trails in the vicinity of the express lanes project.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Next question from Jason Stanford. The Maryland project would save Maryland nearly $2 billion in maintenance costs on I-495 and I-270. Would Virginia see similar maintenance cost savings as a result of the 495 Next project?
So I'll answer that more broadly. I don't have a specific number. I will say Virginia's model is that we retain maintenance of our general purpose lanes. Those are retained with the state, so that's not something that we would turn over to a private toll operator, and that's just been our model in Virginia. But I will say that just generally speaking, because we would have brand new infrastructure, replacing some of the aging bridges that go across the Beltway, providing brand new pavement. So we would certainly see just maintenance generally going down because we would have new infrastructure in the corridor.
Okay, our next question is from Omar Malik. He has a question on access to hot lanes from Georgetown Pike. This will make traffic worse as the general purpose lanes will be more crowded as managed lanes will take space. It will make getting out of our neighborhood during rush hour even more difficult. So is there access to hot lanes from Georgetown Pike as an option? Otherwise, you are increasing backup on local roads. Abby or Susan?
I mean, I think our study, when we looked at it without access at Georgetown Pike, and we did not see that as a result. We did not see traffic increasing in those areas. So as currently proposed, there is no express lanes access at the Georgetown Pike interchange.
Okay, Supervisor Faust has a question for Abby and Susan. Go ahead, Supervisor.
Thank you very much. Abby, I've been extremely concerned about the interchange at Dulles Toll Road and 495, and I'm still waiting for information about how high those ramps will eventually get to be. But my question tonight is with regard to the traffic studies. I assume phase one was included in the first, the 2025 studies, traffic studies. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We assume those ramps will be in place by 2025. And Supervisor Faust, we will be sending you tomorrow that information that you requested.
Thank you. And that, just so it's clear, that's a pretty good turnaround because I just asked for it. I wasn't suggesting that you were sitting on it. You are one of the most responsive people, and I appreciate that. Phase two, was that included in the 2045 traffic studies, the completion of the ramps that you have kind of as a wish list for called phase two?
Yes, the phase two and the ultimate ramps were included in the 2045 models.
Okay, so the phase three were also included in the 2045 models?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because it was stated tonight that it would be 2045 or later, I guess. But that's what I figured. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the ramps at the American League, or at the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which haven't been addressed, I don't think. In particular, what is being done with respect to, or why are noise walls not being provided around those ramps?
Susan, do you want to answer that, or you want me to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think that, that is one of the areas around that George Washington Memorial Parkway interchange where we do see a new noise wall shown just north there. And we do have a wall that's being placed on the east side. I think there was one area where the project goes into the GW Memorial Park itself onto their property, and there was an extension of a wall that was looked at. I believe that's what you're talking about, where it was not deemed reasonable and feasible because of the limited benefit that we saw houses receiving. But I think also because the Park Service was not receptive to having a wall on their property. Is that?
That's my understanding. I mean, if the data demonstrates that a wall is required, I think it behooves you to work with the Park Authority to make sure that that wall gets provided. I mean, it just because they don't want it is not necessarily good enough reason not to provide it, in my opinion. And it's relevant to how we look at the project. So anyway, I appreciate it. I think tonight was a very good presentation. I appreciate the information, and especially appreciate the questions that I heard. So thank you.
I see there's a question about how much would it cost to build metro across the ALB, and nobody's jumping in to answer that one. But I mean, I would just say it's not just about the bridge, it's about the space that you would need on either approach. It would certainly take a regional, huge regional coordination because, as you know, local governments are usually the ones that foot the bill for the infrastructure itself. It would take regional coordination. And I would say it's definitely multi-billion. 4 might be low when you look at the kind of constraints that you have in those corridors, because it's not just the construction, even if it's feasible, but it's also the impacts in terms of right-of-way. And that would take a huge coordination across the river, I would say. I don't know if Rob, you want to say anything regarding that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if Jennifer DeBrule or Ciara are still on, or maybe even Zach, but whether I don't believe that shows up in any of the long range or vision plans for metro service, so to speak, across there. And you know, I think that is important. I mean, these are plans that are developed with a very long horizon, looking at all the eventualities, and just the fact that may not be represented in any of those plans, I think speaks a lot to the viability of that.
Hey, Rob, that's accurate. It's not in the long range plans, and not wanting to speak for Metro, but you know, there are challenges related to core capacity on the Metro system, capacity at the Roslyn Tunnel, you know, that make looking at something like this in the future a little more challenging, but yeah, that this is not something that is documented in any of the long range, even vision plans for the corridor.
Okay. The next question is from Sherry Konka. Will the 495 Next project provide the transit needed to comply with the Tysons comprehensive plan? The comp plan states to support the level of development in Tysons forecasted for the year 2050, it is necessary for transit to achieve a 31% mode share of all person trips to, from, and within Tysons Corner during peak periods.
Well, I'll certainly jump in on that, and just to say, as I said before, I mean, currently transit is not precluded by the study, although it is not directly included at this point, other than to provide the express lanes that transit could use. But I also would go back to my earlier statement that there are active discussions around all of this based on the input, and nothing, I repeat, nothing is off the table at this point. Delegate Favola, or sorry, Senator Favola. I think you're muted.
Sorry. As part of the project design, before any further steps are taken with Transurban, is it the expectation that VDOT will identify whatever criteria or factors are needed to really make a transit option work? I mean, do we need public parking somewhere? Do we need a certain frequency of service? What would we need to make transit a real viable option? I guess it'd be rapid bus transit.
Yeah, and I think that number one, and I think tonight was a great lead into that, in that we need the results of the transit study. The transit study, if it shows certain things are viable, then that allows us to then go back and say, okay, what does transit need to look like? And what would that require to support that? And then, as was mentioned earlier, around any negotiations with Transurban and so forth, if the project were to move forward, we have to come up with exactly what the scope of the project will be, and work with them on that. That we would basically lay out, these are the requirements, both environmentally, from the road perspective. And if there were a transit piece of that, that would, the state would have to lay out what all that is and whether. Now, the other part of this is, I will say that this is an extraordinarily expensive couple of miles of roadway. And in the end, we have to, if we move forward with Transurban, we have to negotiate a contract that works for everyone. They have to be able to make that type of investment and see some reasonable return on that investment. And if we add too much, that may not be possible, but I don't know that today. That's why we got to find out exactly. We're working through all this to find out the exact scope of the project for 495 Next, but also getting the results from that transit study will be indicative of exactly the needs for any transit service to be provided, any supporting infrastructure for that transit service. And that's, I think at that point, then we have to put together our entire scope of what's needed. So I hope that answers. It's a little, it's not definitive because we don't have all the answers today. You're muted again, I'm sorry.
Michelle?
It does answer my question, and I understand that your intentions are noble. I just want to reiterate that transit is a very important piece from the public benefit perspective, and it's something that I think will need to be part of the project. How extensive, what it looks like, I don't know, but I'd like it to be a meaningful piece.
Yeah, and I have had discussions with Secretary about that, and she is hearing directly about the comments and the concern with transit. And as I said, tonight, I want to be extraordinarily clear, nothing is off the table.
Michelle?
Yes, Tom, go ahead.
So this is Tom Bashadny. I'm the Director of Fairfax County's Department of Transportation. In response to the question about transit mode share into Tysons, certainly providing transit on the express lanes between Tysons and Bethesda or other parts of Montgomery County would assist in meeting that goal of 31% mode share for transit in the future. So yes, it would be very helpful, and that's one of the reasons the county is also strongly supporting a transit commitment as part of this project. Thank you.
Michelle, I think that perhaps Supervisor Palchik was trying to speak.
Yes, thank you. I had muted my phone too. I think hopefully you can hear me now, the double mute.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I appreciate Barbara Favola and then Tom from our team speaking to this. And I hear what you're saying, Rob. I guess I have to say the lack of commitment is a little disappointing at this point. I really hope we get past that. I would say hearing especially what Tom just mentioned about the need for public transit to really reach that Tysons commitment, which, as you know, is the economic engine of our Commonwealth, is critical. It's beyond an option. I really hope we can get to the point where we see the criticality of truly including this, because we know we can't just build our way out of traffic. We really have to incorporate the funding and the any necessary infrastructure for that multimodal transportation. This really, I know I'm hearing that all options are on the table, and I really hope we can get to a point where it's more than just an option, but also, a highlight of this project.
Well,
and just to say, sorry, one more thing, but I know it was said earlier, I think by Susan, that often these the costs are burdened by the locality, and I really hope that we see more of a commitment from Virginia and not having that full burden on the locality for these projects that I think are critical. And I think the study, I agree with you, will tell us quite a bit about what is possible here.
Yes, and thank you for the comment. And again, I just want to say that these comments are being heard. They are definitely being heard. and there are active discussions underway. So that's where we are tonight. But that's only where we are tonight. We'll see where we are tomorrow. We're trying to move forward.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions that we need to get through, and then we're going to go ahead and conclude the meeting. I lost my place. Okay, this is from Jacob Cristofano. When will the public be able to comment on proposed aesthetic designs for the next project? For example, bridge aesthetics or sound wall designs? Susan or Abby?
So we are working on developing those guidelines. I think, we're in an existing corridor where, a lot of that has already been established. I think we are looking at doing some treatments on wall surfaces similar to what we've done on corridors like 66 inside the Beltway, providing a couple of options out there for people to comment on. I would say that's something that could be done during the design build phase. We are looking to have something that would be easily maintained and would be similar to what we've done on our other projects. So it would be looking at having like a dry stack type finish, a stone look finish to a concrete surface. At bridges, we're looking at that around the GW Memorial Parkway. We want something that would blend in with what they have on that corridor. But then as you approach Tysons, it begins, the corridor has kind of a different look to it. So I would say we'll have some basic guidelines that we can have out on our website for people to comment on. It is a construction detail that really can, be influenced even later in the construction period.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Mark Scheffler. With the region, MWCOG committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, why is the 2045 plan for the I-495 Dulles Toll Road interchange even being considered?
Well, I'll start, and I will let Abby answer if he wants to, because he's our traffic guy. But I mean, this study and the ramps that you see were needed to address congestion that we were seeing in that 2045 year without those ramps. So it was specifically to address congestion, which is what then creates, the issue with the greenhouse gases. So it was really around moving those volumes in that corridor and in that interchange area safely and effectively and efficiently as possible. And it really did come out of the traffic study and was required by FHWA. So Abby, I don't know, you want to add anything?
No, I guess I want to mention that this is the Dulles Toll Road and the Capitol Beltway. So are the two most used freeways in this region, intersecting at the Dulles Toll Road Beltway interchange. And as Susan mentioned, the previous studies determined that that level of infrastructure was needed to be able to accommodate the future needs for the region. This is right outside Tysons, and it also serves, well, these two facilities serve the entire region, and the Dulles corridor is anticipating significant growth in the future, and therefore the previous study determined that level of infrastructure is what is needed to be able to provide safe and adequate traffic operations in this area.
Okay, next question is from Elizabeth Hubner. Has a double-decker bridge been considered to cut down the footprint? Abby or Susan?
Well, I would just say the bridge is, and maybe Dusty is going to chime in here on the Maryland side. It is mostly owned by Maryland, but you want to speak to that, Dusty?
Yeah, I can. I'm not aware of any double-decker design associated with the ALB. I would note that there would, while it may cut down on some of the footprint, there would be other considerable issues that we would have to look at associated with noise, associated with the visual view, and the National Park Service is right there next to it. So we would have to weigh the impact of reducing the footprint with other impacts that a double-decker bridge would have down there. But I'm not aware of any design focused in on a double-decker bridge.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. There was a link provided by Zach to the transit service report. Okay, the next question is the claimed traffic travel times include the American Legion Bridge having been widened, which it isn't, the Dulles interchanges, which are unfunded, and we are studying transit DRPT now. Why the rush to build before Maryland?
We analyze conditions in 2025 prior to the construction of the Maryland project, and in 2025 with the construction of the Maryland project. So under both scenarios, we see those improvements in travel times on the express lanes, as well as reduction in volumes in the local streets. So those are very significant benefits. With respect to the long term, we anticipate that the Maryland project will be in place. So the 2045 analysis was done only with the Maryland project and the widened bridge in place. And with respect to the Dulles Toll Road, basically based on the acceptable methodology for an analysis, those are ramps that are included in the regional plans. It's called the Constrained Long Range Plan. And therefore, we assume them to be in place. And we see some significant benefits associated with the construction of the project when those ramps are in place, as well as when the Maryland project is in place.
May I say something? This is Supervisor Faust. I'd just like to respond to that. I mean, you see traffic benefits, and I do too, with those ramps. But the impact of those ramps on that area of the county, which includes residential neighborhoods and Tysons, which we're trying to create as a transit-oriented community, is going to be overwhelming. And so I think you have to look at that intersection for alternatives. I mean, clearly there's a lot of traffic there, but you know, right now, the reason it's such a ridiculous end product is that you separate so many different types of traffic, whether it's, you know, getting to the airport or coming down the toll roads or using the hot lanes or the general purpose lanes. And what you're ending up with there is a spaghetti network of ramps that is going to be just very destructive to that entire area of Fairfax County. And so I don't think you should go forward thinking that that is how this is going to look when you're done. I think you need to be looking at options. It's really, really important, I think.
Thank you, Supervisor Faust. Okay, we're going to go to the next question, which there's two questions that are kind of similar. So I'm going to go ahead and read them one right after the other. This is from Omar Malik. would giving Maryland a chance to start a bus service to alleviate traffic on the American Legion Bridge on existing roads should be given a chance. This is by far the best option to reduce traffic on the American Legion Bridge. They have done a study and have ranked bus routes. These bus routes will still work without 2 miles of hot lanes on the Virginia side. Mass transit should always be option number 1 and not new highways. Can we stop this project to give Maryland a chance to start their bus service? A developed country is where the rich take mass transit and not where the poor are stuck in traffic. The follow-on question that is related to that is from Paul. He says, Omer keeps saying the 2 miles on 495 next isn't needed for transit to work. Is that true? How would the buses get from Tysons to Maryland through the traffic without the express lanes?
Well, Michelle,
Go ahead, Rob.
Can you hear me? It shows I'm muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say that, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll certainly toss it over to Jennifer DeBrule and Ciara and Zach. In the past, there was bus service, and it didn't work. It didn't work because they didn't save any time, and we see between a 5 and 24-minute savings in the express lanes if they were built. So that is significant. That's significant in terms of allowing transit to be a desirable option. I mean, it's if it's just a break even at time, many people won't necessarily pick that option. Some will, just based on their personal beliefs or their desire to be able to relax as they ride, but many won't. But that time savings is absolutely critical. So the express lanes would provide that, a pretty significant, not something to be overlooked at all. But in the past, bus service did not thrive in that corridor, and there was no real savings because you had to sit in the traffic in the bus. But I don't know if Zach, Jennifer, or Ciara from a transit. I'm not trying to speak for transit.
Mr. Rob, you have express lanes right now. We're just talking about the 2 miles not being there. You still have HOV lanes the buses can run on. You still have the express lanes without 495 next. And with less traffic on the bridge, they would be moving faster.
Yeah, but the 2 miles of express lanes is what provides that time savings.
I'll just chime in to add to what you're saying, Rob, in response to Omer's comment. And indeed, there were some services in the transit services report from the 270-495 Maryland Managed Lanes Project that looked at service across the bridge. And as that project progresses, my understanding is that the conversation with the locals, mostly Montgomery County in this case, but also Frederick and Prince George's on the Maryland side, will identify how they want to prioritize those services. I think in the past, the services that have been prioritized for funding, at least on the Montgomery County side, just bear witness that it's mostly going into DC and hasn't been across the bridge. I'm not familiar with that previous service, Rob, that you mentioned. MTA, Maryland, does operate service in the Baltimore region, but then does operate some commuter bus service. The locals have opportunity to contribute to that funding, to that budget. It's mostly driven by local need, and the priorities have been thus far, again, Frederick County, Montgomery County, into DC. I think the conversations around the managed lanes is what kind of spurred the, hey, let's get some more service across the bridge. I think also with just the growth that's happening in Northern Virginia. So it's definitely on the table. I'm not sure there's savings in travel times because of managed lanes. Whether or not it can be competitive enough without those 2 miles, Omer, that you're referencing. I think we in FTA try to leave that up a bit to local priorities. And again, that's mostly Montgomery as well as Frederick. So I think the conclusion of this study. This is an opportunity, a platform for those locals to voice their opinion on what they prioritize, in addition to the previous transit service work group, which was just Maryland focused mostly. So again, we'll see what the product of this study says, if it prioritizes it, and if the locals want to move it forward.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question in our chat and one phone question, and then we will go ahead and conclude our meeting for this evening. Let's see. This is from Mark Scheffler. Are autonomous public transit vehicles, for example, Waymo, on the managed lanes at 65 miles per hour being considered as part of the transit study?
I'll take this, Jen. I think, it's something to consider. We'll need to have those conversations with our consultant team, but we also need to consider things like technology readiness and as well as capital and operating costs to determine if it's a viable option.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Our last question of the evening is from a caller with the last two digits of 73. You'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself. Caller with the last two numbers of 73, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, not hearing anything. We still have caller with the numbers ending in 95. Still has a raised.
Susan?
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Susan?
This is Michelle, April.
Oh, Michelle, thank you. This is April Georgeless. I think it's time to really take more than a pause here. VDOT keeps sharing the same misinformation on 495 next, and they want the public to believe it. Faulty facts in result in faulty statements. I think it's time to go back to basics. First of all, consider the Maryland DEIS studies. There are only 2 studies in 495 next that are done without the assumption of traffic improvements in Maryland with their hot lanes in place and a new bridge. However, Maryland's DEIS studies say no, only hot lanes will improve. There will be increased congestion for the general lanes, local streets and access points, and 3 choke points. VDOT needs to properly look and redo the local studies. They need to include this new data out of the Maryland DEIS, which is not showing VDOT's assumptions. The choke point impacts on 495 next have not been studied for the access ramps, the local streets, CBC corridors, 123 Old Dominion, 193 Tysons and the region, and they need to be properly studied. The studies are inadequate. They're missing. They have to be readdressed. Deborah's statement to Susan about her points about the choke point increasing, of course that's true. Susan said it back in May 20th of 2019 to all of us that would happen, and it is. Your studies even show it. Enough of this stressful nonsense. It's time for real traffic studies. It's time for an EIS, which should have been done in the beginning because VDOT decided an EA was great. No, an EIS has to be done not just for 495 section, but it ties in with the entire hot lane corridor up to Tysons. There have to be proper regional studies done and accounting for the $6 million for the EA study. How has it been spent? What's left to still do proper studies? And the outreach is inadequate to say the least. The answers to our questions have not been forthcoming as the officials requested from VDOT. There's no posting of our comments with answers. The VIA, the visual impact assessment for the community, which is required by law, and the elevation drawings have not been done for the community impacts. I requested them. I have not received them. And they should be posted for the entire community to review. There are wrong studies as well as wrong maps. On your maps, you keep saying Live Oak. If you look officials at the maps, it says the noise wall will be extended or replaced. There is no noise wall on Live Oak Drive. We were promised it, but we were deceived, and we got a low little wall that created huge sound problems for the Langley Club as well as homes along Live Oak Drive. And just as, you know, I keep hearing you say, I think Rob said this several times, there are wonderful VDOT conversations going on with Maryland, but unfortunately they're bypassing the community and transparency and public process. This is not nice. It's not appropriate or acceptable. Something has to change, guys. Please stop this insanity and do it right. Thank you very much.
So one comment I just wanted to make, you know, we are doing our traffic study and environmental studies. It's not just a Virginia decision. In fact, it really does go to our partners, FHWA, who will review from a technical standpoint. They will have their experts review our analyses. So you don't have to take just Abby's word for it or a consultant's word for it or my word for it. It goes even above our level to have a completely independent review. And so that will be what is happening later in December and January when we submit our reports to FHWA.
And Susan, will that include proper construction impact studies and silica dust studies? What Maryland has discovered is outrageously harmful for their children, their communities, their parks, their schools. And yet we don't see any silica dust studies. We have Langley Club. We have schools all along the corridor, including Cooper right there without proper HVAC equipment to filter even what we've got there for those children. This is unconscionable. And I keep hearing the same lines and we're all hearing the same little spiel and PR. It's nonsense. It's empty words. And Susan, if you really coordinated with Maryland, you would have done an EIS with Maryland and for our whole corridor. But this was presented as a standalone project, and even that has been mishandled because you VDOT insisted on an EA instead of an EIS, which was appropriate. Considering what you want to do between 193 and the bridge, it's unconscionable. And I hope our officials are listening, that they will take a stand finally. I thank Supervisor Faust for his comments. I thank Favola and Murphy for what they're trying to do. And Palchuk, thank you, Supervisor Palchuk, for listening. But more has to be done now to look at the basics, because the studies that VDOT has presented for 495 next are inadequate. They're missing studies, and it's inappropriate to pursue this any further and put the citizens through the stress that we don't need right now for a project that will only do harm for our area. And by the way, Supervisor Faust, you can't mitigate flyover ramp noises, let alone from 3 flyover ramps where they want to place them at the GW. Thank you for being concerned about that, but that's not possible. So Susan, you know, to keep hearing these words being spewed and they're just not true, I think you guys need to really step back. And that December comment period, why in the world is that still posted? Officials, please change that now and have it open-ended to coordinate with all the public meetings that will be needed after we see all the changes and the lists of changes since May 20th, 2019. Thank you.
April, we're going to have to conclude the meeting. Okay, we thank you for your comments.
Excuse me, this is Deborah Butler, and I have a comment. I put it into the chat that I wanted to speak. So I'm sorry that you didn't see it. I'm sure it was an oversight. I really appreciate Rob Carey saying if the express lanes are built, it provides the savings. So that's the crux of this issue. If the express lanes are built. So number one, that means that we need to pause until Maryland begins. Number two, we need to study if they are built, do we still need that? And number three, if nothing is off the table, I appeal to our Commonwealth of Virginia to go back and look at an alternative, which the comments to the EA from the EPA insisted upon. They strongly, robustly asked for another way of looking at this project. And I think it's time that we do that. And moreover, Commissioner Kilpatrick on October 2nd, 2015, in his review of the detailed level screening of this recommendation for I-95, found that it did not meet public merit. And then VDOT signed an agreement in 2019 with Transurban, which makes this a new project and which means that it needed to be evaluated by the P3. We've been asking this under FOIA. Where is it? Where is the cost benefit analysis that demonstrates that this project is good for the Commonwealth of Virginia? Where is it? Where is it?
So I would just say, I do believe we've responded to the FOIA request that a high-level study was done, but it is not available publicly because we are still in discussions with Transurban.
It had to happen before the project, not while the project is going on, not after the public comment, not after an agreement is made. Legally, procedurally, it had to be done before. Where is it? I understand it's happening now. What changes have happened since this October 2nd, 2015 letter from Commissioner Kilpatrick that allowed this project to go forward?
So thank you for your questions. I
so
will
welcome.
Look back, we'll work to get answers in writing, I believe, for both of those. So I do want us to, we do need to conclude the meeting. We're well over our time limit. So Michelle, I'll defer back to you.
All right, thank you. We want to thank everybody who joined us this evening, and thank you for your inputs and your questions. And any follow-up that we discuss, we will be working on. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Good night. Okay, I'm ending.